And today we're in a series called You in 5 Years. We've been talking about envisioning how you want to become and what you want to do over the course of the next 5 years. Having that vision is really helpful. Having that image is really helpful. In fact, yesterday we had the privilege, some of us had the privilege to hear Pastor Larry Osborne, and he talked about a lot of things. He's a pastor, but a really great leader of churches as well. And he made this comment, and I thought it was really just in conjunction with what we've been talking about. He said, we tend to overestimate what we can do in 1 year, and we underestimate what we can do in 5 years. So we typically quit by year 4, right? So we tend to underestimate what we can actually accomplish in 5 years. If we do small, intentional things over and over and over and over again, that will determine who we become. But oftentimes we get tired, so let me ask you this question. What happens if you persevered? Over the next 5 years, you persevered, you pushed through, you did the stuff that you need to do, and you made the choices that you need to make. Over the course of the next 5 years, what would you become, and what would you be able to accomplish if you did that? I say great things. So I'm going to encourage you to, over the next 5 years, but this morning we've been talking about different choices that we need to make. Small, intentional choices you make today, you make tomorrow, you make the day after that. We make small intentional choices and take small intentional steps. That will determine who we become in the next 5 years. And today we're going to talk about a choice that is filled with potential to impact our lives in a significant way. And the choice that I'm talking about has to do with our time, how we use our time. Right? So how many of you, you've ever just thought to yourself or said maybe, I just wish I had more time to do X, Y, Z. You know, something, right? Anybody? You do that? I wish I had more time to spend with my kids. I wish I had more time to invest in my marriage. I wish I had more time to do a hobby. Wish I had more time to surf. I wish I had more time to fish. I wish I had more time to play golf, whatever. I wish I had more time to do the things that I would really love to do, but the reality is you got to mow the lawn, you got to go to work, there's a work project, there are things that we do in our life, but most of us feel like, I wish I had more time. Now, I used to say a lot, and I hear this a lot, when you ask somebody how they're doing, what is one of the first things that most people will say? I'm what? I'm busy, right? I know that was you had like a million things to choose from, but I'm busy. I hear this all the time. I'm busy. I'm busy. Our lives are stacked with stuff, and I used to say that a lot, but I don't say it anymore. And I want to encourage you. I hope after today's message, you don't say it anymore, because here's what I found out about myself, and I think this is true of all of us. I choose the time that I have for the things that are important to me. Right? I choose those things. The reality for all of us is that we have a limited amount of time. We have a limited amount of time. There will be a time when all of our time is spent. We have a limited amount of time. There's probably a great measure of things that you want to do and that you need to get done. And the reality is that we don't have enough time to do all the things we want to do and to get done all the things we want to get done. That's reality. So we have to choose how we use our time. And here's what I found out about me is I choose what I have time for. The things that I want to do, I choose to make time for them, and then there are just a bunch of things that don't get done. So we are continually making choices for one thing over something else. We have to. So I want to encourage you as you listen today, I want to encourage you to choose the important over the things that are just urgent. Because oftentimes what we do is we allow all the urgent things around us, it just feels like, and sometimes we don't know how to distinguish between important and urgent, so we just allow all the urgent things to get on our calendar, to stack our lives, and what ends up happening is that the important people and the important things get squeezed out because we're always responding to and reacting to the urgent things. And so today, this is really going to be helpful. In fact, if this is your first time at church in a long time, or you're not a God follower yet, this is really going to be helpful as we discover what God has to say about the way that we use our time. Now, there is a difference between urgent and important. Let me just kind of describe a little bit of how that would work. If you're a business owner, if you're a restaurateur, let's say you have a disgruntled customer, dealing with that disgruntled customer is urgent. But developing a process or a system that leads to less disgruntled customers is important. Does that make sense? If you don't change the oil in your car is going to break down. Getting your car repaired is urgent. But changing your oil on a regular basis is important. Does that make sense? And so we're talking about choosing the important over just the urgent. If you get sick because you're not getting enough sleep, because you're not eating right, because you're just running yourself into the ground, because your calendar is all stacked, then going to the doctor to get well is urgent. But changing the way that you live, the way that you eat, the sleep that you get, and the rest that you get is important. But what we often do is we allow the urgent to push out the important. Seth Godin is a guy who writes books, and he does a lot on leadership. He's considered a marketing guru. He made this comment, and I think this is really helpful for us. He says this. He says, if I choose what is important, or if you choose what is important, you won't have to deal with as many things that are urgent. Think about that. If you choose what is important, you won't have to deal with as many things that are urgent. He said, but the opposite is never true. So it's really important for us to distinguish between important and urgent so that the urgent doesn't drive our lives and squeeze out the important, and more importantly, squeeze out in your life this thing called space. Because when the space or the margin in our life gets squeezed out by all the urgent that drives us, then bad things happen in all different realms. Financially, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, all things bad happen when space gets squeezed out. So today I want to look at this radical interaction. When we read this story, some of you may be familiar, some of you may be hearing it for the first time. Jesus has this interaction with these two ladies, Mary and Martha. And it is a contrast in this one who is living their life responding to the urgent, and this other one who lives actually in this moment responding to the important. And so I think there's a lot to learn from this. Let me just set up a little bit of context, because I think this is really important to note too. In this period, Jesus is going to come over to somebody's house to have an interaction with them. Two women. In their culture, men's space and women's space were two separate things. Does that make sense? This was not just the Jewish culture. This was, in many of the cultures in the day, women had their own space, men had their own space, and the two didn't typically intermingle with each other. They had pretty defined areas. And Jesus comes into somebody's home, and this woman is going to break some social boundaries, and Jesus is not going to correct it. He's going to allow it to happen. And so it's a really interesting story here of Mary and Martha and Jesus' interaction. So here's how it goes as you read in Luke 10. If you don't have a Bible, we'll put the notes up on the screen so you can read along with us. It says, as Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha, she opened her home to him. So think about this now, especially if you're a woman. How many of you women, if you got somebody coming over your house, man, you're going to clean up everything, right? In fact, some of you just don't even entertain or open up your home because you just the thought of what it would take to get prepared is overwhelming. I totally get that, and I think Martha gets that as well. The beauty is she's going to open up her home. The challenge is it's going to cause some problems for her in this interaction. So Jesus had a sister, though, called Mary, who sat, this is what Mary did, who sat at the Lord's feet listening. And just circle that, she's listening. And she's doing something that I'm going to talk about later on. She's sitting at the Lord's feet, and she's listening to what he said. I will go back to that. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. Okay, so she's freaking out. Honestly, if I knew that Jesus, the Son of God, who I perceived to be the Messiah, was coming to my house, I'd go meet him at a restaurant or somewhere, you know what I mean? Because there's kids' clothes to pick up and things to get organized. We have 5 children, so at any given moment, you walk into our house, and it looks like a bomb of life exploded there. And so she is scrambling to make preparations to have this very important guest And then she came and she asked him, and I love this about her. She is so forthright. She says, Lord, don't you, we don't know the emotion, right? I don't have a soundtrack, so I'm going to interject my own emotion, okay? She said, Lord, don't you care? I mean, you don't even care that my sister has left me to do all this work by myself. You ever felt like that? I mean, look at their life. Their life seems so easy. And look at my life. And God, why do you give me all this stuff to do? And their life looks so she's upset. Jesus, my sister is just sitting in with you. And she's not even in her space. Her space was supposed to be, remember I talked about men's space and women's space. Her space was actually supposed to be in the kitchen. That was the space that was relegated to the women. So she comes through the kitchen into the living room, which is the common area, which was mostly the place where the men hung out. Not only that, but she sits at his feet to listen to Jesus. This is significant culturally, and Jesus lets it all happen. This is Jesus' way of communicating. Jesus was revolutionary. He's breaking down all the walls that these societies had constructed, and he's allowing this to happen, and she's offended. Because I got all this stuff going on to get ready for the guests, and you're not even helping me. And she tells Jesus this. Jesus, tell her to help me. Whoa. There's an exclamation mark in my Bible, so I don't know what's in yours. But like, Jesus, tell her to help me. Now, I don't know why she went down that road, but let me tell you what happens when space gets squeezed out of our lives, especially when space gets squeezed out of our time. When space gets squeezed out of your time, and think about it this way. You got to go to work. You know how much time you budget to go to work. You know, you budget 30 minutes to go to work. Things don't go right in the morning, and now you got 20 minutes to get to work. And inevitably, what happens when you got 20 minutes to get to work? You get behind somebody who's just enjoying the beautiful Hawaii day, and you're like, oh, what? Get out of my way. And so what happens when space gets squeezed out of our time is our stress levels rise. So Martha is scrambling to get ready for Jesus who's coming over, and as that's happening, her stress level is rising. You know what else happens when space gets squeezed out of our lives? Think about it this way. If I were to come here, when I'm standing back here, you all are okay with me talking. The closer I get to the stage, how many of you start to go like, I hope he doesn't fall off? Anybody? Right? This is why I don't stand here, because I start to go, don't fall off. What happens when we squeeze the space out of our time and out of our life is that our focus narrows. And we become less aware of everything out here, and we become very myopic. In fact, we become survival-oriented myopic. And the things that are out here don't matter as much. It's just the thing that's right here. And inadvertently, we become selfish, myopic. And so sometimes you ever have those moments where God's tapping on your shoulder and he says, man, I got this great opportunity for you. But your life is so squeezed and your space is so small and you're so focused on what you got and are caring. You go, I don't have time for that. And this thing that's supposed to be a great opportunity becomes just an additional burden. And the reason why is because we squeeze the space out of our lives. And it becomes a burden. And then you know what? Really, this is the kicker. And our relationships begin to suffer. Because whenever we have squeezed time out of our lives, then our relationships begin to suffer. It's when we're sitting at the table and you're there, but you're not really there. And dad and mom, they're on their computers or on their phones or they're dealing with business and we're there, but we're not really there because busyness is the end of intimacy. Busyness just kills intimacy. So when we allow the urgent to swamp our lives, then we start living for the urgent, taking care of the urgent, and it squeezes out the space in our time, the space that we need so that we can be at peace, so that we can not have a focus that is so myopic that everything that happens pushes us over the edge, and so that we can actually have healthy relationship. I can't tell you how many couples have told me, you know what, our lives are so busy, my husband and I, we just miss each other. I don't know when the last time we had a really meaningful conversation is. And it's just hit and miss, and it's just touching. You got the kids, I got the PTA meeting or whatever it is, and everybody's just going, and there's no intimacy in the relationship. It's because busyness kills intimacy. And the things that are important most to us really in this lifetime, they boil down to relationships. We tend to, at times, measure them by progress. That's why we try and do so much. But really, at the end of the day, I don't know if anybody on their deathbed is going to go, man, I wish I would have been able to do one more business report. Oh, man, it would have been just... We're probably going to go, you know what, I wish I would have been able to spend more time with the people that I loved and done the things that are important. So this issue of our time, this is so huge. In choosing the important over the urgent, in this story, there's big clues to how we can begin to do this in a better way. So as we go on in the story, Martha is totally distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. Totally distracted. Let me just ask you honestly, how many of you find yourself more distracted by the urgency of things around you than by the important things that are so important and you know you want to do them? Anybody in here, you just find yourself distracted by urgent things, right? Somebody's got... Why do we allow... I'm going to ask this question. Think with me. Why do we allow the urgent to displace the important in our lives? Why do we allow that to happen? And some of you would go, you know what, because we live in Hawaii, it's expensive to live here, and I got to have the jobs that I got, and I got to work hard to make that happen. And I think that is part of the answer. Others of us would say, you know, it's just, I have a big family, I got a lot of stuff going on. This is just a season, and you ever just said, this is just a season of my life. After the season is over, things will go back to normal. And sometimes that is a part of it, right? We find ourselves in different seasons where we've got to give more to certain things. I think that's part of it as well. And then some of us would just be totally honest and say, you know what, I've been really undisciplined. And now you're trying to catch up for all the things that you didn't do because you procrastinated, you put them off. And I think that's part of the problem as well. But I want to submit to you, I think a bigger part of the problem is fear. That's what I think the bigger part of the problem is. We're just afraid that somehow if we don't do more, that we won't be more, that we won't achieve more, that I won't matter as much. And so we say, you know what, if I don't go to that, then I'm afraid that. Or if I don't do that, then I'm afraid that this is going to happen. Or if you got kids like me, if I don't have my kids in all these activities, I'm afraid that this will happen. I remember there came a season in my life, again, I have 5 kids. We have our kids in all these different activities, and at the end of the day, nobody's having fun. You know what I mean? We're just kicking kids out the cotton, and we're not really doing that. But, yeah, go to your soccer practice already. Your kid plays golf, and they hit that one shot, and all of a sudden you start thinking PGA Tour and scholarships, and so you get them involved in all kind of things. And then at a certain point, you're like, nobody is enjoying this anymore because our schedules are so packed, and we're afraid that if we don't do, then we won't be. And so in our culture, we call it FOMO, right? We're just afraid of missing out. We're afraid of not doing as much as we could, and we're afraid of falling behind. Or we're just afraid that our life won't really matter because we've connected with how much activity we got going on to our worth and our value. The bottom line is a lot of it, I think, that drives us is fear. Fear. So we do all these things because we're afraid. And fear of not mattering much has the potential to not just distract us, but to pull us away from what matters most. If we allow it to drive our lives, if we allow it to drive our schedules, if we allow it to drive our time. And so I want to encourage you this morning to do what this other woman does, Mary. So before I get there, though, let me ask you this question. Think about this. What is the most important thing that you've been distracted from pursuing? What is that thing? What is that most important thing? What is it that you are faithfully pursuing that is urgent, but that faithful pursuit of the urgent is distracting you from pursuing what is most important? All right, some of you, it comes down to just your time with God, your time with Jesus. And it's not that you don't want to follow Jesus. It's not that you don't want to know him. But you got all these other commitments going on, and they're just right in front of you. And you got bills to pay, and you got work to do, and you got relationships to maintain, and all these things. And it's squeezed out the time that you have with God. But the you in 5 years that you envision is a more mature, is a deeper, devoted, is a closer relationship with God. but you've allowed the distractions of the urgency around you to squeeze that out. And so the most important thing you're not pursuing anymore. So what is that thing that is being pushed out because you're pursuing just the urgent? Some of you would say it's my children. You get to the place like my wife and I did where, you know what, we are so busy doing all these things, we're not really even engaging in the relationship that we want to have. It's crazy, right? We're spending all this time, and I feel like Uber, I should charge them $20 for a trip, and I'd make a lot of money because I'm driving them all over the place, but we're no longer enjoying that. And you know what inadvertently happens is that this urgency to give our kids everything in the world, they become these little idols in our lives. And you know what the most important thing that you give your kids is a healthy marriage to your wife. So we get so wrapped up in serving our kid. I'm not saying that we don't, but we get so wrapped up in that we don't even know each other anymore. And we just kind of touch base to just coordinate our schedules, and we lose that relationship that is supposed to be the anchor, the foundation, the rock of the actual family. And so we lose the important marital relationship because we've given it to something more urgent in front of us instead. So I want to encourage you to choose the important over the urgent. Some of you, this is a big one, it's just your physical body. Your physical body. And I know you think, I don't have time. I don't have time to work right. I don't have time to get my meals right. I don't have time. Your life is busy and urgent, and there are things you got to do, and so you're not doing the things that you need to do, the important things. And I want to encourage you to choose the important over the urgent. Because over the long run, if you do the important, you'll have less urgent. But if you don't take care of the important, things will break down. Your body, your physical body included. And this last one, I think this is real big. There are just some things that are internal things that you and I know we need to deal with. There are addictions. There are issues where we just have not overcome, and it just bleeds into all the other areas of our life. But we're busy, right? And to deal with this area of my life, this is going to mean, getting in a place where I can have some type of confession, where I can ask God to begin to change my heart. It's not just going to happen in a moment. I've got this attitude, or I've got this sin that I struggle with, or I've got this addiction that I have to overcome. And that is the most important part, because over the next 5 years, that thing will either grow weaker or grow stronger, and you want it to get weaker, and you want to allow God to change it, but you're so busy going, that you don't stop from the urgency to deal with the important. And so, especially if you're in your 20s and 30s, let me encourage you not to get so driven by the attempt to achieve success right now that you neglect the little things in your life, because those little things will become more prominent as you get older, as you get in your 50s and your 60s. And everything that we fail to deal with in our 20s and 30s, it only gets magnified in our 50s and 60s. All you 50s and 60-year-olds, can I get a, that's right? It is right. It is right. It's true. So I want to encourage you to deal with the important things. And so let me just give you a couple thoughts, okay? A couple practical thoughts. And I'm going to read the story, and then we'll give you a couple practical thoughts. Martha ended up surrendering to all the urgency, right? It's make preparations for Jesus. And here's what it says in Luke 10. Jesus says, Martha, Martha, the Lord answered, you are so worried and upset about so many things. And when I read this, I kind of feel like, Jesus, you just don't understand my world, because my world has a lot of things going on. And so Jesus says, and it sounds insensitive, but Martha, really only a few things are needed. Really only a few things are core. And then he goes to this one thing, and he says, really? It's only one thing. And I'm thinking, are you out? I got so many things that are important. And Jesus says, they are, but there is one primary thing that is important. And this is a little bit of an allusion to, in the Old Testament, the portion of the Bible that was written before Jesus. There was often this conversation about this one thing. Now think about this. One of the kings at the time in the old portion of the Bible, the Old Testament, is this guy named David. He is a king who's got enemies breathing down his back and kingdom things to deal with. But David said this. David said, one thing I desire. Just one thing. the most important thing to me is to be in the presence of the Lord. And he says to dwell in God's house, to see him or behold the beauty. Because unless you create enough space to dwell, you'll never see the beauty. You'll never see the beauty when you just kind of stop in and then stop back out. And on the way to something we're hurried to get through to get an answer, that doesn't entail a relationship. David says, there's one thing that I desire. I want to be in your presence long enough to where I see your beauty. This is a beautiful thing. This is that one thing. It's not the only thing, but it is the most important thing. And when we get this thing right, then it brings clarity to the rest of our life. But when we don't get this thing right, then it brings darkness and obscurity and confusion, and the direction is not clear, and our soul is not clear. So he says one thing, and Jesus told Mary and Martha, there's one thing that is really important above all the rest. And Mary has chosen this one thing. And it looks like this. Mary has chosen it. She had to make a choice, and she chose. It is better, and it will not be taken away from her. So let me give you some practical thoughts this morning as you're taking notes, just really quickly. If you're going, you know what, okay, I want to do a better job of choosing the important over the urgent. There are some practical things that I would encourage you to do. And the number one is to have courage to start, stop, less, and more. That means start doing some things, stop doing other things, do more of some, and do less of others. So for some of you, what you might want to say is, I need to start having just a regular relationship time with God. I want to get to know God. So I'm going to start reading the Bible. I'm going to start praying, and I'm going to make that like a portion of my day. I'm going to put that on my calendar. I'm going to squeeze out the space. In order to do that, I have to stop doing certain things. Some of you may want to, and this is what I've done. This has been so helpful. In the morning time, before I have my time with God, I have stopped looking at the news and social media. That one move has created more space in my time. And then when I actually get in the presence of God through the Bible or through prayer, there's clarity and relationship rather than wondering what is going to happen in our world or what somebody's doing on social media or what did they mean by that, or I looked at the email that said this and now I've got to respond to that, and now my mind is all cluttered and the space is squeezed out. So that's something that has really helped me, stopping that. And then what do you need to do more of? What do you need to do more of? Maybe for some of us, it's, you go to a small group like once a month, and now maybe, I need to be more regular participant in small group because that's where I'm going to get encouragement, and that's where I'm going to have support, and that's where I'm going to have people who are helping me in my relationship with God. So you're going to increase that, and you're going to stop doing certain things like, the many hours that you spend on social media, the time that you spend playing Fortnite or whatever it is you're doing that you go, you know what? I think I need to do less of that to create more space for what is more important. Second thing I'm going to encourage you to do is to be selective with your yeses. To be selective with your yeses. The most productive and the best leaders that I've seen and the best moms that I've seen are not those who do more. They do more of what is important. And I think one of the things that hinders us from doing what is important is not lack of commitment, it's just overcommitted lives. We have just said yes to so many things that the time in our lives is squeezed out. We're doing a lot, but we're not doing a lot of the important or the right things. So I would encourage you just to be selective with what you say yes to. Is this something that is ultimately important, or is it just urgent? Doing more, if you want to be a great follower of Jesus, it's not just doing more to please God, it's doing more of the right things that give him glory. Does that make sense? And so last one, this will help. Do what matters first, or do first what matters most. Do first what matters most. This is what Mary did. Mary sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. She sat. Now, this doesn't mean she was just sitting there going, oh, Jesus. That's not really it. When it says sitting at the Lord's feet, it's discipleship language. Paul said that he was a student of this guy named Gamaliel, which meant that he sat under his teaching, which meant he focused on what he taught, and he studied under him. And he gave his intense attention to this guy named Gamaliel. And Mary breaks the societal boundaries, comes out of her place, comes into the living room, and sits under the teaching and listens to God's every word coming out of the mouth of Jesus. She is a follower of God. And Jesus doesn't go, you know what, this is actually a place reserved for men. You need to go. He doesn't do that. He actually commends her for doing it and says, Mary, this is it. This is it. Whether you're a man or a woman, this is it. I want you to choose what I've chosen, which is to focus intently on God and on His Word in your life. And so Mary pushes back against societal norms, and she creates space. Space for this relationship to happen. And instead of running around doing all the things that were urgent, she makes space for what is most important. It's the thing that Jesus says will not be taken away from her. Not now, not ever. In fact, Jesus himself had this discipline of going and creating space. And here's why. Because with that space and the presence of God comes in our lives just clarity. Clarity comes from the presence of the Lord. Without the presence of the Lord in our lives, you and I, we live in darkness. This doesn't mean that, you can't be a follower of God. This means you're not going to be a clear follower of God if you don't have a continual interaction with the presence of God in your life. And so I'm just going to read these scriptures and then we're done this morning. Jesus says this. These are some of his descriptions about Jesus. Very early in the morning, Jesus got up and he went off to a solitary place where he prayed. He went off to this solitary place. Other verses describe it as a lonely place. It was a place where there was nobody but him and God. He created that space because Jesus knew that, you and I, we can't hear from God when our lives and our minds are crowded. We can't. We've got to go to that space where it's not always just on the go and we're always in a hurry, but we give space for the relationship to just breathe. Jesus, it was said about him, at daybreak, Jesus went out to a solitary place. In Luke 6, it says, as Jesus went out to a mountainside to pray and spent the night praying to God. After leaving them, he went up on the mountainside to pray. After he dismissed them, he went to Makapu'u to pray by himself. Later that night, he was there all alone. I love that Jesus is not afraid of being alone. He's not afraid of being alone. He sees the value and the importance of it. When our life is always surrounded by things and people, then we're not always doing the important things that we need to be doing. And I love this one, Luke 5:16. Jesus often withdrew to the lonely places and he prayed. That was the pattern of his life. It was to go to find that lonely place of relationship with God. It is doing on a continual basis what he's commending Mary for. Mary, good job. Martha, thank you for hosting us. Thank you for preparing this place. But Martha, you're driving yourself crazy and you don't have peace. And the reason why you don't have peace is because you've mistaken the urgent for the important. And you've chosen the urgent over the important. But Mary, you've chosen something that will never be taken away from you. It is the one thing that is the most important. And when you put that thing first in your life, all the other things get clear. But when you don't have that one thing clear, then we're just shooting at this and this and this. And we're being driven by this fear of missing out, this fear of not mattering. But Mary, you've chosen the important thing. So I wonder this morning, how many of us have just been so distracted? And this is not to beat us down. I know I get this way as well all the time. This is to encourage us that maybe there are certain things we need to start, some things we need to stop, some things we need to do more of, and some things just less of. Maybe we need to be more selective with our yeses. Instead of just saying yes to everything, we begin to say no to the things that are just urgent and yes to the things that are more important. And then we do first the thing that matters the most. we give priority in our lives to creating space for this ongoing relationship with God? What if tomorrow morning you just said, you know what, I'm going to put it in my calendar. I'm going to start the first 15 minutes of the day reading the Bible and praying and developing that relationship. Remember, we overestimate what can happen in 1 year, but we underestimate what can happen over 5 years. We're playing the long game here. This is over the course of time. I can develop this beautiful relationship with God that will bring clarity to all of my life, bring strength to my faith. What if we chose to pursue the important over the urgent?